Ilara took a deep breath. It's about your fall into the pool. Mr. Julian. I don't believe it was an accident. Ilara, however, saw Julian. She saw the careless flick of his wrist as he dismissed a servant, the entitled smirk that played on his lips, the way he navigated his privileged world with an air of unchallenged superiority. She heard the whispers of the other staff, the thinly veiled contempt for Julian's excesses, and the quiet resentment that simmered beneath the surface of their forced smiles. Yet, she also saw the fleeting moments of vulnerability, the almost imperceptible flicker of loneliness in his eyes when the party lights dimmed and the sycophants departed. These moments were rare, almost imagined, but they hinted at something beneath the polished facade. Julian's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Of course, it was an accident. I was careless. Her days were a monotonous rhythm of dusting priceless antiques, polishing gleaming silver, and scrubbing floors that always seemed to acquire new stains. Each task was a reminder of the debt that weighed heavily on her family, a silent promise that kept her rooted in this life of servitude. Every penny she earned was meticulously saved, a drop in the ocean of what was owed. But even amidst the drudgery, Ilara clung to a secret hope, a fragile dream of a different life. She devoured books in her cramped attic room, losing herself in tales of courage, intellect, and freedom. She envisioned a future where she wasn't just a maid, but someone who could make a difference, someone who could stand on her own 2 feet, free from the golden cage that held her captive. It was a distant, almost impossible dream, but it was hers, and it fueled her quiet resilience. The summer sun beat down on Sterling Manor, turning the sprawling estate into a shimmering oasis of excess. Today was another one of Julian Sterling's infamous pool parties, a spectacle of wealth and superficiality that Ilara had come to dread. The air vibrated with the thumping bass of pop music, the high-pitched laughter of socialites, and the clinking of champagne flutes. The pool, a vast expanse of turquoise, was already dotted with inflatable swans and a scattering of designer-clad bodies, all vying for Julian's fleeting attention. No, Ilara insisted, stepping closer. I've been observing things, small things, that no one else seems to notice. The pool deck that day, it was unusually slick, almost as if something had been deliberately spilled. And George, the pool attendant, he was given an unexpected day off, authorized by Marcus Thorne. Ilara moved through the chaos like a ghost, her presence as unnoticed as the discarded napkins she collected. Her task for the afternoon was to keep the pool area pristine, a Sisyphean effort given the constant stream of spills and forgotten items. She meticulously picked up a scattered deck of cards, then straightened a crooked sun lounger, her gaze sweeping over the scene with a practiced efficiency. She saw the forced smiles, the competitive glances, the hollow conversations that revolved around money, status, and fleeting trends. It was a world she observed but never truly belonged to. Julian scoffed. Marcus, my cousin? Don't be ridiculous. He's family. Julian, meanwhile, was at the epicenter of the revelry. He held court by the diving board, a glass of something sparkling in his hand, surrounded by a chorus of sycophants. His expensive swim trunks clung to his athletic frame, and his hair, usually impeccably styled, was now artfully disheveled from a recent dive. He was laughing, loud and boisterous, as one of his friends recounted a particularly scandalous anecdote. He leaned back, balancing precariously on the edge of the board, his attention fully absorbed by the flattering banter. Family can be the most dangerous, Mr. Julian, Ilara countered, her voice gaining conviction. She then laid out her observations, calmly and methodically, the faint residue on the tiles, the hushed conversations among staff, Mrs. Davies's suspicious note passing, and Marcus's increasingly frequent and secretive phone calls, including the glimpse of Mr. Chen's name. A sudden, unexpected gust of wind swept across the pool deck, rustling the palm trees and sending a cascade of leaves into the water. Julian, momentarily distracted by the sudden breeze and perhaps a touch more intoxicated than he let on, shifted his weight. His foot, slick from the poolside spray and the condensation from his glass, slipped. His eyes widened in a fleeting moment of surprise, then panic. The laughter around him continued, oblivious. The music pulsed, drowning out the small splash as he tumbled backward into the deep end of the pool. As she spoke, detailing each piece of the puzzle, Julian's initial skepticism began to waver. He remembered Marcus's subtle digs, his constant prodding for Julian to take risks, the way his cousin always seemed to be around when something went wrong. The pieces Ilara presented, seemingly insignificant on their own, began to form a chillingly coherent picture when viewed through her lens. His friends, still engrossed in their conversation and the general cacophony of the party, didn't notice. One was adjusting her sunglasses. Another was taking a selfie. A third was mid-sentence, recounting a recent shopping spree. The water churned for a moment, then settled. Julian, caught off guard, swallowed a mouthful of chlorinated water. The initial shock gave way to a desperate struggle. He thrashed, his limbs flailing awkwardly, the weight of his clothes and the sudden disorientation pulling him deeper. He wasn't a weak swimmer, but the unexpected fall, the swallowed water, and the sheer panic of the moment rendered him helpless. He gasped for air, but only water filled his lungs. The vibrant party continued around him, a cruel, mocking backdrop to his silent, terrifying fight for breath. The world, for Julian, had dissolved into a chaotic swirl of green and blue. The muffled sounds of the party above him became a distant, mocking hum. As his lungs screamed for air, he thrashed, his expensive clothes becoming heavy anchors, pulling him down. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him, overriding any instinct for self-preservation. He was drowning, and no one, absolutely no one, seemed to notice. Mr. Chen, Julian murmured, his face paling. He's been trying to acquire parts of Sterling Enterprises for months. My father has been fighting him off, but someone did. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The humiliation of being rescued by Ilara, the immediate resentment, all faded in the face of this terrifying possibility. His fall wasn't just carelessness. It was a calculated attempt on his life, designed to destabilize his father and the company. From the periphery, where the discarded glasses lay like fallen jewels, Ilara had been working. Her eyes, trained by years of observation, had caught the subtle shift in Julian's balance, the sudden, unnatural splash that was lost amidst the general revelry. While others laughed and chatted, she had seen the fleeting terror in his eyes, the desperate struggle as he disappeared beneath the surface. For a split second, a lifetime of slights, of being invisible, of enduring his family's disdain, flashed through her mind. He was the epitome of everything she resented, the symbol of the privilege that kept her bound. He looked at Ilara, truly seeing her now not as a maid, but as a sharp, observant, and incredibly brave young woman. His pride, though still present, was overshadowed by a dawning sense of vulnerability and a reluctant admiration. He was forced to confront the truth he had been blind, and the person he had dismissed had seen everything. Yet, in that critical moment, none of it mattered. Her innate compassion, a deep-seated empathy that had survived years of hardship, surged to the forefront. The human instinct to save a life, regardless of who it was, took over. There was no hesitation, no thought of consequence. Without a sound, without a glance to see if anyone else was watching, Ilara dropped the tray of glasses she was holding, kicked off her worn flats, and plunged into the shimmering turquoise. "So, what are you saying?" Julian asked, his voice low, a new seriousness in his tone. "That Marcus tried to drown me?" The cold water enveloped her, but her movements were swift and purposeful. She was a strong swimmer, a skill honed in the small, muddy river near her childhood home, a stark contrast to the manicured pool of Sterling Manor. She cut through the water, her eyes scanning the murky depths for Julian's flailing form. She found him quickly, his eyes wide with terror, bubbles escaping his lips. He was heavier than she expected, a dead weight of panic and expensive fabric. "I believe he orchestrated it. Mr. Julian," Ilara confirmed, her gaze unwavering. "And I believe he's still planning something." With a surge of adrenaline, Ilara grabbed him firmly by the arm, her small but strong hands finding purchase. She kicked powerfully, dragging him upwards, fighting against his panicked resistance. His thrashing made it difficult, but she held on, her focus solely on getting him to the surface. Finally, with a gasp that tore through the music, Julian's head broke the water. He coughed, sputtering, his eyes blinking rapidly against the chlorine. A tense silence filled the room. Julian ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He had access to his father's private files, to company records, to the inner workings of Sterling Enterprises. Ilara had the keen eye for detail, the ability to observe without suspicion, and a unique perspective from the shadows. They were an unlikely pair, bound by a shared danger and a growing, fragile trust. Ilara, still holding him, propelled them towards the nearest edge of the pool. She hoisted him up, pushing with all her might, until he could grasp the edge. Then, with a final, exhausted push, she helped him scramble out, collapsing onto the cool tiles beside him. Both of them dripping wet, gasping for breath. "All right," Julian finally said, his voice firm. "Show me everything. We'll work together. But if you're wrong, Ilara," the music still blared. But a sudden, eerie silence had fallen over the immediate vicinity of the pool. Heads turned. Conversations died. The laughter had ceased. All eyes were fixed on the soaked figures by the poolside Julian Sterling. The golden boy, shivering and coughing, and beside him, the humble maid, Ilara, her black dress clinging to her hair plastered to her face, her chest heaving. The sight of her, the despised, overlooked maid, having just saved the life of the family's prized son, was a shock that rippled through the entire party, stunning everyone into a profound and uncomfortable disbelief. The silence that had fallen over the pool area was profound, a stark contrast to the thumping music that still vibrated through the air. It was the kind of silence that demanded attention, forcing every head to turn, every conversation to cease. The party guests, moments ago lost in their own self-absorbed worlds, now stared, wide-eyed and bewildered, at the scene unfolding before them. "I'm not wrong, Mr. Julian," she interrupted, her eyes blazing with conviction. "And we don't have much time?" Whispers, like a sudden breeze, began to ripple through the crowd. "Was that the maid? She saved him." Julian almost drowned. The disbelief was palpable, etched on every face. These were people accustomed to a world where problems were solved by money, where servants were invisible, and where the Sterling heir was untouchable. The sight of a humble maid rescuing their golden boy shattered their carefully constructed reality. The alliance was forged, born not of friendship, but of necessity and a dawning respect. The spoiled heir and the humble maid, once separated by an unbridgeable chasm of class and prejudice, were now united against a common, insidious enemy. Their combined strengths, Ilara's sharp observations and Julian's access to family secrets, were their only hope of exposing the true orchestrator of the plot before it was too late. The alliance between Ilara and Julian, born out of necessity, quickly transformed into a relentless pursuit of the truth. Julian, with his access to the Sterling family's extensive network and confidential documents, became Ilara's guide through the labyrinthine world of high finance and corporate intrigue. Ilara, with her sharp mind and uncanny ability to notice the smallest details, became Julian's eyes and ears, uncovering the subtle clues that he, in his privileged bubble, had always overlooked. Just then, a sleek black car pulled up to the manor's entrance, its tires crunching on the gravel. Mr. Sterling, Julian's father and the formidable CEO of Sterling Enterprises, stepped out. He was a man carved from granite, with eyes that missed nothing and a presence that commanded immediate respect. He had arrived early, perhaps to check on the party, perhaps to deliver another stern lecture to his son. Their investigation led them down a perilous path. They meticulously reviewed security footage from the day of the pool party. Cross-referencing it with staff schedules and visitor logs, Ilara pointed out a brief, almost imperceptible moment where Marcus, seemingly adjusting his tie, had subtly flicked something onto the pool deck just before Julian's fall. Julian, using his father's secure network, traced the unusual day-off approval for George, the pool attendant, back to a forged email sent from a temporary, untraceable account, an account that had only been active for a few hours. His gaze swept over the chaotic scene, his brow furrowing at the unusual stillness. Then, his eyes landed on Julian, pale and dripping wet, and the equally soaked Ilara beside him. A flicker of raw panic, a rare emotion for the stoic CEO, crossed his face. He strode forward, his powerful frame cutting through the stunned crowd. The residue Ilara had collected from the pool deck was sent to a discreet private lab Julian knew of. The results were chilling: a highly concentrated, fast-acting lubricant, designed to be colorless and odorless, but incredibly effective at reducing friction. It was clear evidence of sabotage, Julian, what happened? His voice, usually a low rumble, was sharp with alarm. Their suspicions about Marcus Thorne solidified. They began to scrutinize his financial dealings, his recent acquisitions, and his sudden interest in specific Sterling Enterprises projects that were vulnerable to market manipulation. Julian discovered a series of large, untraceable transfers of funds from an offshore account into Marcus's personal accounts, coinciding with the aggressive moves made by Mr. Chen's rival company. The connection was undeniable. Marcus wasn't just working with Mr. Chen. He was being paid handsomely to systematically dismantle Sterling Enterprises from within. Julian, still dazed, gestured weakly towards Ilara. I fell. Dad, she pulled me out. The realization hit Julian with devastating force. It wasn't just a business plot. It was a profound personal betrayal. Marcus, his cousin, a man he had grown up with, had attempted to drown him. He had manipulated him, undermined him, and now he was actively working to destroy his family's legacy. The trust Julian had implicitly placed in his own blood, in the very fabric of his family, shattered into a million pieces. His arrogance, his carefree attitude, all seemed trivial and foolish in the face of such calculated malice. Mr. Sterling's gaze shifted to Ilara, a long, assessing look that seemed to pierce through her exhaustion. He saw her shivering, her humble attire clinging to her, and the undeniable truth of her actions. His initial panic slowly receded, replaced by a profound, almost overwhelming relief. His son was safe, his only son. Ilara watched him, her heart aching for the raw pain etched on his face. She had seen betrayal before, in smaller, more mundane ways. But the scale of this treachery, coming from within the family, was truly horrifying. Yet, she also saw a new resolve hardening in Julian's eyes, a steely determination that replaced his previous flippancy. This betrayal, while deeply painful, was forging him into a man of substance. The weight of Ilara's heroism settled heavily in the air. This was not a minor incident. This was a life saved, a dynasty potentially preserved, by the most unlikely of saviors. The contrast between the powerful CEO, his son, and the humble maid who had just performed an act of immense courage was stark. It was a moment that defied all expectations, a silent testament to the fact that heroism could emerge from the most unexpected places, leaving everyone present in a state of profound and uncomfortable awe. The Sterling family's carefully curated image of control and self-sufficiency had been irrevocably altered by the simple, selfless act of a maid they had barely noticed. The silence, thick with unspoken questions and lingering shock, was finally broken by Mr. Sterling. He stood before Ilara, his formidable presence softened by an emotion rarely seen on his face, profound gratitude. His gaze, usually sharp and calculating, now held a deep appreciation, a recognition of the immense debt he owed this young woman. They found the final, damning piece of evidence in Marcus's private study. During a moment when he was away from the manor, Julian, knowing the hidden compartments of the old desk, discovered a burner phone. On it were a series of encrypted messages between Marcus and Mr. Chen, detailing the entire plot, the planned destabilization of Sterling Enterprises, the deliberate accident at the pool to create chaos and distract Mr. Sterling, and Marcus's ultimate goal of seizing control of the company after its value plummeted. The messages even contained a chilling reference to Ilara. The maid saw too much. Handle her if she becomes a problem. He extended a hand to Ilara, helping her to her feet. Her uniform, still clinging to her, seemed to highlight her humble origins even more, yet in that moment, she stood taller than anyone else in the room. Julian, still recovering, watched his father with a mixture of confusion and a nascent sense of awe. He had never seen his father look at anyone, let alone a maid, with such genuine respect. The words sent a shiver down Ilara's spine. She had been right all along. Her life, too, had been in danger. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, his voice resonating through the now hushed crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but carrying an undeniable weight. "What you have witnessed today is not just an accident, but an act of extraordinary courage. My son, Julian, was in grave danger, and it was Ilara, our diligent maid, who, without a moment's hesitation, saved his life. With the evidence in hand irrefutable and damning, The weight of the truth became almost unbearable. They had uncovered a conspiracy that reached into the very heart of the Sterling family. The next step was the most dangerous, confronting the betrayer. Julian knew his father would be devastated, but the truth, no matter how painful, had to be brought to light. The time for hiding in the shadows was over. It was time for reckoning. The air in Mr. E. Sterling's grand study crackled with an unbearable tension. Julian stood beside Alara, a stark contrast to his usual nonchalance, his face grim, his posture rigid with a newfound determination. Across from them, Marcus Thorne sat, seemingly at ease, a faint, unsettling smirk playing on his lips as he sipped his tea. Mr. Sterling, seated behind his imposing mahogany desk, looked from his son to his nephew, a deep furrow in his brow. Sensing the gravity of the unspoken words, a ripple went through the crowd. Some nodded, others exchanged glances, still processing the unexpected turn of events. Julian, standing a few feet away, felt a strange mix of embarrassment and a grudging admiration. He had always dismissed Alara, had never truly seen her. Now, she was the center of attention, the unexpected heroine. Marcus, Mr. Sterling began, his voice surprisingly calm. Julian has something he wishes to discuss with you. And with me. Mr. Sterling continued, his voice gaining strength. The Sterling family does not take such heroism lightly. Alara, you have shown courage, selflessness, and a true nobility of spirit. For this, we are eternally grateful. He paused, letting his words sink in, then delivered the announcement that would shock everyone, including Alara herself. Marcus merely raised an eyebrow, his smile unwavering. Oh, and what could that be? Dear cousin, more of your wild escapades. His tone was laced with his usual condescending amusement, a deliberate attempt to disarm Julian and undermine Alara. Effective immediately, he declared, his gaze fixed on Alara. Alara will be handsomely rewarded for her bravery. Not only will she receive a substantial financial sum, enough to clear her family's debts and secure their future, but she will also be granted a full scholarship to the university of her choice, with all expenses covered. This includes tuition, accommodation, and a living stipend. She will no longer be a maid at Sterling Manor. She will be a student, a future leader, and a testament to the fact that true worth is not measured by wealth or status, but by character. Julian's jaw tightened. He held up the burner phone, its screen displaying the damning messages. This, Marcus, is not an escapade. This is evidence. The words hung in the air, met by a stunned silence. Then a murmur that quickly escalated into a buzz of excited whispers. Alara's eyes widened, tears pricking at their corners. A scholarship. A university. It was beyond her wildest dreams. A future she had only dared to imagine in the quiet solitude of her attic room. The golden cage, for so long her prison, had suddenly, miraculously, opened. Marcus's smirk faltered, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, but he quickly recovered. Evidence of what, Julian? A cheap burner phone? Anyone could have that? Julian, too, was stunned. A scholarship for the Maid, his father, a man who valued tradition and lineage above all else, was not just rewarding her, but elevating her, giving her a future that many of his own privileged friends could only dream of. The reward was not just generous, it was revolutionary. It was a public declaration that shifted the very foundations of the Sterling household, challenging the established order and shocking everyone present, from the most jaded socialite to the most cynical staff member. Alara, the invisible maid, had become the unlikely heiress to a future she had earned with her courage. The aftermath of Mr. Sterling's announcement was a whirlwind of emotions, none more potent than the bitter resentment simmering in Julian's heart. He stood by the pool, still damp and disheveled, watching as Alara, the maid he had barely acknowledged, was suddenly elevated to a status that felt, to him, entirely undeserved. The public spectacle of his rescue, followed by his father's grand gesture, felt less like gratitude and more like a humiliating indictment of his own carelessness. Evidence of your betrayal, Alara interjected, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the facade. She stepped forward, placing a small, sealed plastic bag on the desk. And this is the lubricant you used to make the pool deck slick, just before Julian fell. A scholarship for her. Julian muttered under his breath, his jaw tight. His friends, quick to pick up on his mood, began to echo his sentiments, their whispers like venomous insects buzzing around him. Marcus's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a flash of genuine fear replacing his composure. He glanced nervously at Mr. Sterling, who was now leaning forward, his gaze fixed on the phone and the bag, his expression darkening with each passing second. "It's outrageous!" "Julian," purred Tiffany, a socialite with a perpetually bored expression. "She's just a maid. What does she know about university?" Julian then began to systematically lay out their findings, his voice steady, devoid of his usual flippancy. He detailed the forged email for George's day off, the suspicious financial transfers, the aggressive moves by Mr. Chen's company, and finally, the encrypted messages on the burner phone, reading aloud the chilling plot to destabilize Sterling Enterprises and seize control. He recounted Marcus's chilling words about Ilara. "The maid saw too much. Handle her if she becomes a problem." "Exactly," chimed in Brad, a trust fund heir with a penchant for gossip. "It's a publicity stunt. Nothing more. Your father's gone soft." As Julian spoke, Marcus's face drained of color. His carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing the desperate, cornered man beneath. He tried to interrupt, to deny, to deflect, but Julian, armed with irrefutable facts, cut him off at every turn. These insidious whispers, fueled by jealousy and a deep-seated class prejudice, began to take root in Julian's mind. He had always been the golden boy, the center of attention, the one destined for greatness. Now, this unassuming maid had stolen his spotlight, not just by saving him, but by being publicly rewarded in a way that diminished his own perceived importance. He felt a profound sense of injustice, a deep-seated anger that festered beneath his polished exterior. "You tried to drown me, Marcus," Julian stated, his voice raw with pain and disbelief. "Your own cousin. For money. For power." Even some of the other staff, those who had secretly harbored their own dreams of escape from the manor's confines, looked at Ilara with a mixture of envy and suspicion. They whispered about her luck, about how she had simply been in the right place at the right time, minimizing her courage and skill. "She's just getting above herself." One of the older housekeepers grumbled, her eyes narrowed. "Soon she'll forget where she came from." Mr. Sterling, who had listened in stunned silence, finally erupted. His hand slammed down on the desk, making the teacups rattle. "Is this true? Marcus, is this what you've been doing behind my back, plotting against your own family?" His voice was a low, dangerous growl, filled with a fury that Ilara had never witnessed. Ilara, however, remained remarkably composed amidst the sudden glare of attention. The shock of Mr. Sterling's announcement had given way to a quiet, profound joy, but she was acutely aware of the undercurrents of resentment. She saw the thinly veiled contempt in Julian's eyes, the dismissive glances from his friends, and the subtle shifts in behavior from some of her former colleagues. Yet, she refused to let it diminish her resolve. Cornered, with no escape, Marcus finally snapped. He lunged across the desk, grabbing the burner phone, attempting to smash it, but Julian was quicker. He snatched it back, holding it aloft. She knew this was her chance, a lifeline thrown to her and her family. Her focus was unwavering to make the most of this unprecedented opportunity. She spent her remaining days at the manor quietly, diligently, but with a newfound sense of purpose. She began poring over university prospectuses, researching courses, her mind already racing with the possibilities that lay ahead. She carried herself with a quiet dignity, a silent testament to her worth, refusing to be drawn into the petty jealousies that swirled around her. "Yes," Marcus shrieked, his voice cracking, his polished demeanor completely gone. "Yes, I did it. You always favored Julian. Uncle. Always. He was reckless, incompetent. I was the one who worked hard, the one who deserved to lead Sterling Enterprises, but you always chose him. I just sped up the inevitable, and that made," he spat, glaring at Ilara. She was just in the way. Julian, despite his outward disdain, found himself inexplicably drawn to observing her. He would catch glimpses of her poring over books in the staff lounge, her brow furrowed in concentration, or see her interact with the younger maids, offering quiet words of encouragement. He noticed the unwavering focus in her eyes, a stark contrast to the fleeting interests of his own privileged circle. He couldn't shake the image of her, soaked and resolute, pulling him from the depths, It was an image that both shamed and intrigued him, a tiny crack in the edifice of his carefully constructed arrogance, planting the first, almost imperceptible, seeds of a grudging respect he wasn't yet ready to acknowledge. The days that followed Mr. Sterling's astonishing announcement were a strange dance of anticipation and lingering tension within the manor. Ilara, now officially on leave from her duties as a maid, spent her time in a whirlwind of preparations for her university entrance. She met with academic advisors, filled out countless forms, and immersed herself in textbooks, her mind alight with the promise of knowledge. She carried herself with a quiet grace, her humility unwavering despite the whispers and envious glances that still followed her. His confession hung in the air, a venomous echo of his deep-seated resentment and twisted ambition. Mr. Sterling stared at his nephew, his face a mask of profound disappointment and heartbreak. The betrayal, coming from within his own blood, was a wound deeper than any corporate loss. Julian, on the other hand, found himself adrift. The usual thrill of his parties had dulled. His friends' fawning felt hollow, and even his father's stern lectures seemed to lack their usual bite. The incident at the pool, and more specifically, Alara's unexpected heroism, had lodged itself in his mind, a persistent splinter beneath the surface of his carefully constructed world. He couldn't shake the image of her, soaked and resolute, pulling him from the depths. It was an image that both shamed and intrigued him. The climax was swift and decisive. With Marcus's confession ringing in the room, Mr. Sterling wasted no time. He immediately summoned his head of security and legal team. Marcus Thorne, the ambitious nephew, was led away, his protests and threats echoing down the hall, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. Justice, swift and undeniable, had been served, thanks to the unlikely alliance of a once spoiled heir and a brave, observant maid. The immediate aftermath of Marcus Thorne's exposure was a maelstrom of activity within Sterling Manor. Security personnel, legal teams, and a flurry of hushed phone calls replaced the usual quiet hum of the estate. Marcus, his face contorted with rage and desperation, was swiftly escorted away, his threats and accusations fading into the distance. The silence he left behind was heavy, filled with the echoes of his venomous confession. He began to observe Ilara, not with the casual disdain of a master for a servant, but with a nascent, almost involuntary curiosity. He'd catch glimpses of her in the library, a place he rarely frequented himself, her brow furrowed in concentration over a dense academic tome. He saw her interact with the younger, newer maids, offering quiet words of encouragement, sharing tips on how to handle Mrs. Sterling's meticulous demands, or simply lending a sympathetic ear. There was no arrogance in her demeanor, no gloating over her sudden change in fortune. She was still the same Ilara, just with a different light in her eyes. Mr. Sterling, the formidable CEO, remained at his desk, his usual composure shattered. The betrayal by his own nephew, a man he had trusted and mentored, had struck him deeply. He looked older, more vulnerable than Ilara had ever seen him. Julian, standing beside Ilara, placed a comforting hand on his father's shoulder, a gesture of support that spoke volumes about his transformation. The frivolous air was gone, replaced by a son who understood the true weight of responsibility and the pain of betrayal. One afternoon, Julian found himself by the pool, the scene of his near drowning. He was alone, a rare occurrence. Ilara, finishing up some last-minute packing, passed by, a small, worn suitcase in her hand. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment. Julian, uncharacteristically, felt a strange awkwardness. He cleared his throat. Over the next few days, the Sterling family grappled with the fallout. The news of Marcus's arrest and the attempted corporate sabotage sent shockwaves through the business world. Mr. Sterling, with Julian's newfound assistance, worked tirelessly to mitigate the damage, to reassure investors, and to protect the company's reputation. It was a period of intense introspection for the family, forcing them to confront the cracks in their foundation, the hidden resentments, and the dangers of unchecked ambition. Ilara, he began, his voice rougher than he intended. About what happened? Julian, profoundly changed by the experience, took on a more active role in the family business. He no longer saw it as a mere inheritance, but as a legacy to protect, a responsibility he had almost lost due to his own complacency. He began to attend meetings, to scrutinize reports, and to ask insightful questions, surprising his father and the senior executives. His near-death experience and the subsequent uncovering of Marcus's plot had stripped away his superficiality, revealing a sharp mind and a strong sense of purpose. Ilara stopped, turning to face him fully. Her gaze was steady, calm, devoid of judgment. "It's all right, Mr. Julian. I'm just glad you're safe." His transformation extended to his personal relationships as well. He publicly acknowledged Ilara's courage and intelligence, not just for saving his life, but for her unwavering dedication in uncovering the truth. At a small private gathering of key staff and close family, Mr. Sterling formally announced Ilara's scholarship and her departure from service, reiterating his profound gratitude. Julian, standing beside his father, added his own heartfelt words. "No," Julian interrupted, a surprising sincerity in his tone. "It's not just, all right, you saved my life. And I never thanked you properly." He hesitated, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "I've been a complete jerk to you, haven't I?" "Ilara," he said, his voice clear and resonant. "You saw what I was too blind to see. You acted when others hesitated. You are not just a hero, but a true friend. My family and I owe you everything." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Ilara's lips. "You were preoccupied, Mr. Julian." Ilara, standing humbly before them, felt a warmth spread through her. The recognition, especially from Julian, was more valuable than any financial reward. It was an acknowledgement of her worth, not as a maid, but as an individual. The years of being overlooked, of being invisible, were finally over. He almost laughed, a genuine chuckle that surprised even himself. Preoccupied. That's one way to put it. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of rare vulnerability. "My father. He really meant what he said, didn't he, about the scholarship?" The reckoning for Marcus was severe. The evidence Ilara and Julian had painstakingly gathered was overwhelming. He faced charges of attempted murder, corporate espionage, and fraud. His carefully constructed life of privilege crumbled, replaced by the grim reality of legal battles and the certainty of a long prison sentence. Justice, though painful for the Sterling family, was undeniably served. "Yes," Ilara confirmed, her eyes shining with quiet determination. "I'm starting next semester." As the dust began to settle, a new sense of calm, albeit a fragile one, descended upon Sterling Manor. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been a catalyst for change. The Sterling family, though scarred, emerged stronger, more united, and with a newfound appreciation for integrity and loyalty. And at the heart of this transformation was Ilara, the quiet maid who had, against all odds, brought light to the darkest corners of their world. With Marcus Thorne's fate sealed and the Sterling family beginning to heal, Ilara's life embarked on a trajectory she had only ever dared to dream of. The scholarship, once a distant fantasy, was now a tangible reality. She embraced her new beginning with a fierce determination, enrolling in a prestigious university known for its rigorous academic programs and vibrant intellectual community. Julian looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw not just a maid, but a young woman of immense strength, intelligence, and resilience. The superficiality of his own world, the emptiness of his own pursuits, suddenly felt starkly apparent. He felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Not guilt, not admiration, but a complex mix of both, laced with a dawning respect. The transition was not without its challenges. The academic demands were intense, and the social landscape of university life was vastly different from the structured world of Sterling Manor. Yet, Ilara thrived. Her years of quiet observation had sharpened her intellect and her resilience, forged in the crucible of hardship, allowed her to face every obstacle head-on. She excelled in her studies, particularly in economics and international relations, driven by a desire to understand the very systems that had once bound her family in debt. She found her voice in classroom discussions, her insights often surprising her professors and peers, who recognized a depth of understanding beyond her years. She was no longer just the maid who saved Julian Sterling. She was Ilara, a brilliant and compassionate individual carving her own path. "Good," he said, the word coming out softer than he'd anticipated. That's good. You deserve it. Julian, too, underwent a profound transformation. The spoiled heir was gone, replaced by a man deeply committed to making a meaningful impact. The betrayal by Marcus had been a brutal awakening, forcing him to confront his own complacency and the superficiality of his past life. He continued to work closely with his father, proving himself to be not just a capable successor, but a visionary leader. He spearheaded initiatives to reform corporate governance, advocating for transparency and ethical practices within Sterling enterprises. He even established a foundation dedicated to supporting underprivileged youth, ensuring that others, like Alara, would have opportunities they might otherwise be denied. It was a small exchange, barely a minute long, but it was a seismic shift in their dynamic. For Alara, it was a glimmer of recognition from the person who had perhaps scorned her the most. For Julian, it was the first crack in his hardened exterior, a moment where his carefully constructed facade of arrogance began to crumble, revealing a nascent humanity beneath. The seeds of resentment were still there, but now, a tiny, fragile sprout of respect had pushed through the soil, promising a different kind of growth. As Alara immersed herself in the world of academia, preparing for her new life, and Julian slowly began to shed his layers of arrogance, a subtle unease began to settle over Sterling Manor. The incident at the pool, initially dismissed as a careless accident, started to feel less like a random mishap and more like a carefully orchestrated event. It was a faint tremor beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect world, unnoticed by most, but keenly felt by Alara. Their relationship, once defined by class and disdain, evolved into something far more profound. It began as a mutual respect, a shared understanding forged in the crucible of danger and betrayal. Julian sought Alara's counsel on various matters, valuing her sharp intellect and her grounded perspective. He would visit her at the university, often bringing her books or simply sitting with her in the library, discussing everything from global economics to the nuances of human nature. They found a surprising camaraderie, a comfortable ease in each other's company that transcended their past. Her years of being invisible, of observing without being observed, had honed her senses to an almost preternatural degree. She had learned to read the subtle shifts in tone, the fleeting expressions, the unspoken tensions that permeated the Sterling household. Now, with her mind freed from the constant demands of servitude, these observations began to coalesce into a disturbing pattern. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal. Julian learned about Alara's family, her struggles, and her dreams. Alara, in turn, saw beyond Julian's former arrogance, discovering a man burdened by the weight of expectation, now striving to be worthy of his immense privilege. There were moments, fleeting glances, shared smiles, that hinted at a connection beyond mere friendship, a subtle current of something more profound beginning to stir between them. It was not a grand, dramatic romance, but a slow, organic blossoming of affection rooted in shared experience, mutual admiration, and a deep understanding of each other's true character. It started with small things: a misplaced document on Mr. Sterling's desk, a brief hushed conversation between two senior staff members that ended abruptly when Alara approached, a strange car parked discreetly down the lane from the manor for longer than usual. Individually, these incidents were insignificant. Together, they painted a picture of something amiss. Alara was no longer just escaping a past life. She was building a future, brick by brick, with knowledge and purpose. Julian was no longer just inheriting a fortune. He was shaping a legacy, driven by integrity and a desire to do good. Their paths, once so disparate, had converged in a moment of crisis, leading them both towards a new beginning, where true wealth was measured not in possessions, but in the strength of character, the power of kindness, and the unexpected, transformative connections that change lives forever. Years melted into a decade, and the echoes of the dramatic events at Sterling Manor became a distant, yet foundational, memory. Alara, the quiet maid who had once moved through the grand halls unseen, now commanded attention in boardrooms and international conferences. She had graduated with highest honors, her sharp intellect and unwavering integrity propelling her into a distinguished career in ethical finance. She specialized in impact investing, using her formidable skills to channel wealth towards sustainable development and social equity, ensuring that others, like her family had once been, were not trapped by the unforgiving currents of debt. Her work was a testament to her resilience, a living embodiment of the opportunities she had earned through courage and intellect. She was a respected voice, a beacon of change in a world often dominated by greed. A new figure had recently entered the Sterling family's orbit, Marcus Thorne, Mr. Sterling's ambitious nephew. Marcus was charming, impeccably dressed, and possessed a smile that rarely reached his eyes. He had recently returned from an extended stay abroad, ostensibly to assist with Sterling Enterprises' international ventures. But his presence at the manor was becoming increasingly pervasive. He was always there, at dinner, at family gatherings, his compliments often laced with a subtle critique, his suggestions always subtly steering conversations towards his own ideas. Julian Sterling, too, had fully shed the skin of his former self. The spoiled heir was a ghost of the past, replaced by a compassionate and responsible leader. He had not only stabilized Sterling Enterprises, but had transformed it into a model of corporate social responsibility. Under his guidance, the company invested heavily in community development projects, sustainable practices, and employee welfare. He often spoke publicly about the importance of character over class, a powerful message that resonated deeply, knowing it came from a man who had experienced a profound personal reckoning. His foundation, established in the wake of Marcus's betrayal, had grown exponentially, providing scholarships and mentorship to thousands of underprivileged youth, a direct echo of the chance Ilara had been given. Ilara noticed the way Marcus would subtly guide Julian into making impulsive decisions, often involving risky investments or questionable social engagements. She saw the way he'd subtly undermine Julian in front of Mr. Sterling, disguised as concerned advice. She also observed his unusual interest in the manor's security systems, asking seemingly innocuous questions about their vulnerabilities. Their relationship had deepened into an unbreakable bond, a partnership built on mutual respect, unwavering trust, and an affection that had blossomed quietly over the years. They were each other's confidants, their conversations ranging from complex business strategies to the simple joys of life. There was no need for grand declarations or public displays. Their connection was woven into the fabric of their lives, a quiet strength that underpinned their individual successes. They often met, sometimes at a bustling university cafe, sometimes in Julian's now more understated office, sometimes simply walking through a park, discussing ideas, sharing dreams, and reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought them together. One evening, while clearing away after a late-night meeting between Mr. Sterling and Marcus, Ilara overheard a fragment of a conversation. Marcus's voice, usually smooth, was tight with frustration. "He's too reckless. Uncle, one of these days, he'll truly mess up. And then where will Sterling Enterprises be?" The words, seemingly about Julian's general irresponsibility, resonated with a chilling undertone in Ilara's mind, especially when juxtaposed with Julian's near drowning. The final scene finds Ilara, now a celebrated figure in her field, delivering a keynote address at a global summit on economic justice. Her voice, clear and confident, filled the auditorium. She spoke not just of policies and figures, but of the human stories behind them, of resilience, of unexpected kindness, and of the profound impact one selfless act can have. In the front row, Julian watched her, a proud, knowing smile on his face. He was no longer just the CEO's son. He was a man who had learned the true meaning of wealth, not in possessions, but in the strength of character, the power of kindness, and the transformative connections that change lives forever. Their story was a powerful reminder that heroism comes in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most unexpected places, brought to light by the most unlikely of saviors. Ilara's intuition, sharpened by years of navigating a world where survival depended on reading between the lines, screamed that something was wrong. She remembered the precise spot where Julian had fallen, the way the pool deck had been unusually slick, almost as if something had been deliberately spilled there. She recalled the strange absence of the usual pool attendant that day, a detail she had dismissed at the time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay with us for the next one. And while you're here, check out our other videos. There's always more to explore. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. These weren't just random occurrences, they were pieces of a puzzle. And Alara, the girl who had once been invisible, was now the only one truly seeing them. A hidden agenda was at play, subtly manipulating events around the Sterling family. And Alara, with her unique perspective from the shadows, was slowly, inadvertently, becoming aware of its sinister presence. The accident was beginning to look less like fate and more like a carefully planned prelude to something far more dangerous. Alara's mind, once solely focused on her academic aspirations, now found itself increasingly consumed by the unsettling feeling that something was deeply wrong at Sterling Manor. The scattered observations from Part 8, initially mere anomalies, began to connect, forming a chilling mosaic of suspicion. Her years of quiet servitude, of being a silent observer in the grand theater of the Sterling family's lives, had inadvertently equipped her with an unparalleled ability to see what others missed. She started her discreet investigation with the pool area, the scene of Julian's near tragedy. She revisited the spot where he had fallen, her eyes meticulously scanning the tiles. She remembered the unusual slickness, a detail that had bothered her, even at the time. Now, she noticed a faint, almost invisible residue clinging to the grout lines near the edge, a subtle sheen that wasn't typical of pool water. It was barely perceptible, but to Alara's honed senses, it was a glaring anomaly. She carefully scraped a tiny sample onto a piece of tissue, a silent, almost instinctive act. Her next focus was the staff. The usual pool attendant, a meticulous man named George, had been mysteriously absent on the day of the party. Alara subtly inquired among the other maids and groundskeepers. George, they said, had been given a sudden, unexpected day off, a rare occurrence, and who had authorized it. Marcus Thorne, they vaguely recalled, had mentioned something about George needing a break, a small detail. But it resonated with Alara's growing suspicion. Why would Marcus, a new addition to the inner circle, be managing the schedules of long-term staff? She also recalled the hushed conversation she'd overheard between two senior staff members. She couldn't remember the exact words, but the tone had been urgent, furtive. She decided to observe them more closely. Over the next few days, she noticed them exchanging quick, nervous glances whenever Marcus was nearby. One afternoon, she saw one of them, Mrs. Davies, the head housekeeper, discreetly slipping a small, folded note into a discarded newspaper in the staff lounge, only to retrieve it moments later when no one was looking. It was a classic dead drop, something out of a spy novel. But Alara's instincts told her it was real. The misplaced document on Mr. Sterling's desk also nagged at her. She remembered seeing it, a financial report, but with a strange, handwritten annotation in the margin that looked suspiciously like Marcus's distinctive script. She couldn't access it directly, but she made a mental note to look for similar annotations on other documents if the opportunity arose. Alara's investigation was a solitary, dangerous endeavor. She moved through the manor like a shadow, listening, observing, connecting the dots. She noticed Marcus's increasingly frequent private phone calls, always taken in secluded areas of the manor, his voice low and urgent. She even managed to glimpse a name on his phone screen once. Mr. Chen? A name she vaguely recognized as a business rival of Sterling Enterprises, a company that had recently been making aggressive moves against Mr. Sterling's interests. The pieces were slowly falling into place. The slick residue on the pool deck, the unusual absence of the pool attendant, Marcus's subtle manipulations of Julian, his suspicious interest in security, the hushed conversations, and now, the connection to a rival company. It all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. Julian's fall was no accident. It was a deliberate act, a calculated attempt to destabilize the Sterling family, and Marcus Thorne was at the heart of it. Alara, the quiet maid, now held a dangerous truth, a truth that could shatter the Sterling dynasty and put her own life in peril. She knew she couldn't keep this to herself much longer. She needed to find an ally, someone who would believe her, and the most unlikely candidate was Julian himself. Alara knew the truth she held was a volatile secret, one that could either save the Sterling family or shatter it completely. The weight of it pressed down on her, a heavy burden in the quiet solitude of her room. She needed an ally, someone with the power and influence to act on her suspicions. And, ironically, the only person who truly had a vested interest and who was now slowly shedding his disdain, was Julian. The thought of approaching him, the arrogant heir who had once treated her as less than furniture, sent a tremor of apprehension through her. But the urgency of the situation, the chilling certainty that Julian's near drowning was no accident, outweighed her trepidation. She decided to choose a moment when he was alone, away from the prying eyes and judgmental whispers of his social circle. Julian, still coughing and shivering, pushed himself up, his eyes darting around, a mixture of shame and confusion clouding his features. Beside him, Ilara, soaked to the bone, remained on her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her black dress clung to her slender frame, and her hair, usually neatly pinned, was now a dark, dripping halo around her face. She looked utterly vulnerable, yet undeniably heroic. That evening, she found him in the dimly lit billiard room, idly chalking a cue stick, a rare moment of quiet contemplation for him. He looked up, surprised, as she entered. The slight awkwardness from their previous brief exchange still lingered in the air. The air in Sterling Manor hung thick with the scent of polished mahogany and old money, a fragrance that clung to Ilara like a second skin. Every morning, before the first rays of dawn kissed the sprawling lawns, she moved through the silent, cavernous halls, a phantom in a world that barely acknowledged her existence. Her uniform, a crisp, starched white apron over a simple black dress, was a constant reminder of her place a maid, an unseen cog in the Sterling family's meticulously ordered universe. "Mr. Julian," Ilara began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I need to speak with you. It's urgent and confidential." Ilara was young, barely out of her teens, but her eyes held a weariness that belied her age. They had seen too much, too soon. The crushing weight of her family's debts, the endless cycle of struggle, and the stark contrast between her meager existence and the boundless opulence surrounding her. The Sterlings, a dynasty built on generations of shrewd business and inherited wealth, lived a life of unimaginable luxury. Their manor, a sprawling edifice of stone and glass, was a monument to their power, a golden cage where Ilara served. Trapped by circumstance, Julian raised an eyebrow, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. But something in Ilara's serious demeanor held him. He gestured to a nearby leather armchair. "Confidential." What could possibly be so confidential? Ilara. His tone was still tinged with condescension, but there was a hint of curiosity. Among the Sterling elite, Julian Sterling shone brightest, or perhaps, most blindingly, the CEO's only son. Julian was a whirlwind of designer clothes, expensive cars, and an insatiable appetite for lavish parties. His laughter, often loud and devoid of genuine warmth, echoed through the manor's grand rooms, a constant soundtrack to Ilara's quiet work. He embodied everything Ilara found superficial and frustrating about the world she inhabited, a world where privilege was a birthright and effort seemed optional. Julian never saw Ilara, not truly. She was part of the background, a moving shadow, a non-entity in his vibrant, self-centered universe. He would often leave trails of discarded champagne flutes and half-eaten canapés in his wake, expecting them to vanish as if by magic, never giving a thought to the hands that cleaned up his excesses.